who truly ruled Europe during the 17th century? The kings? The emperors? Or was it someone hidden far from the marble thrones and royal courts, seated instead in the cold shadows of the Vatican? For centuries, historians have pored over papal bulls, secret treaties, royal decrees, and dying confessions. But scattered among these documents is a whisper, a repeated phrase appearing in different languages and handwritings across different decades the Black Pope decides. Always unsigned, always marginal, but too persistent to ignore. In 2003, a forgotten archivist in Vienna uncovered a wooden box sealed in wax and wrapped in 3 layers of parchment. Inside was a single sheet of vellum charred at the edges with one line etched in blackened ink. The true authority wears no crown, speaks no word, and is never seen. There was no origin, no seal, no context. Just a date. Rome, 1610. It would be easy to dismiss such a fragment as fiction, as a hoax, perhaps the musings of a mad monk. And yet this message corresponds with a series of abrupt shifts in European power. The sudden assassination of Henry IV of France, the diplomatic reshuffling of Spanish alliances, and the obscure internal reforms of the Holy See events that all coincided with the rise of a new and nameless figure in Vatican records. This figure is never directly mentioned. But in the margins of certain archived letters, a symbol recurs an eye within a triangle enclosed by a serpent. The same symbol appears carved into a beam beneath the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, concealed from all but those who know where to look. The symbol has no official name yet. It appears in 3 key places on the deathbed letter of Cardinal Borromeo, on the wax seal of an unsigned papal communication sent to the French court in 1613, and carved into the base of a long-forgotten crypt beneath Castel Sant'Angelo. In all instances, the letters accompanying this emblem bear no author, but always the same signature, a circled N. Most disturbingly, in an unpublished manuscript found in the personal library of a Jesuit scholar executed for heresy, there is a mention of a man called the Shadow at the right hand. He is described not as a ghost, but as a function in ancient office passed from one to the next, known only to the Pope and 2 others. This shadow had no fixed name, no history, no portrait. But his title is Chilling Nero Obscurus, the Black Pope. He did not sit upon the papal throne, nor did he preside over Mass. He never appeared in public, nor addressed the world. Yet, according to this manuscript, he signed decisions that never reached the light of day, and chose successors before even the conclave was convened. The manuscript was confiscated by order of the Holy Inquisition in 1643, and thought to be destroyed. It resurfaced, only briefly transcribed in part by a Dutch scholar who died mysteriously weeks after publishing his summary. His final footnote read, "I have looked into the abyss behind the throne, and it has a name. That name, it seems, is not just metaphor." In the corridor beneath the Apostolic Palace among the sealed archives, no longer accessible even to the cardinals, lies a locked iron door. It is listed in the Vatican map as Room 23B. But in the surviving floor plans from 1656, the same door is labeled simply Porta Nigrum, the Black Door. No record states what lies beyond it. But rumors passed among archivists and whispered in the cold hours of candlelit research claim it is the entrance to the Archivum Tenebris, the archive of darkness. A place where forbidden knowledge is kept. Maps of hidden power lines stretching across Europe. Records of blood pacts between popes and emperors. letters in languages no longer spoken, and at the heart of it all, according to one anonymous source in a declassified Jesuit letter, is a single name on every document, the Black Pope. The Church does not confirm his existence. There are no portraits, no public decrees, no grave. Yet decisions were made, kingdoms fell, borders were drawn, and in the midst of it all, a silence that speaks louder than any sermon. So again we ask not who sat on the throne of St. Peter, but who whispered from the shadows behind it, who truly ruled the world, hidden beneath the Vatican's golden dome, unseen, unnamed, and unstoppable. The investigation begins. Vatican, in the 17th century, was not merely a place of prayer. It was an empire of silence, its walls as thick with secrets as they were with incense. Beneath the gilded ceilings and marble colonnades moved not only clerics and monks, but agents, couriers and shadows, whose names never reached the official annals of church history. To understand the rise of the so-called Black Pope, one must first understand the machinery he is said to have operated from within. The Holy See, outwardly a beacon of divine order, was inwardly a labyrinth. Every corridor was a vein of power, every chapel a shield, every confession an opportunity. It was during this century, blood-soaked and trembling under the weight of the Protestant Reformation, that the Vatican became not just a religious center, but the nerve center of a crumbling Catholic world. With the Peace of Augsburg behind them and the 30 Years' War looming, the papacy knew that public authority was no longer enough. Influence had to run deeper, quieter, invisible. This was the age of the Counter-Reformation, of missions and martyrs, of theological wars fought not only on battlefields, but within libraries, convents, and royal chambers. The Jesuit order, founded just a century earlier, had grown into a silent army sworn not just to God, but to a hierarchy so steeped in mystery that even among them there were whispers of a hidden superior. The general of the Society of Jesus was officially the head of the Jesuits, but in more than one intercepted letters now held in private European collections, there appears an enigmatic reference to a second voice in Rome. We await instruction from the second voice, one reads. Another states, he has spoken, and we obey. The voice has no face, but his command is law. These letters are unsigned. Dated 1624. Such writings, dismissed by most scholars as apocryphal or coded metaphors, match, curiously, with the sudden disappearance of Father Giuliano Salvatore, a Jesuit diplomat closely involved in the conversion efforts in the Low Countries. His journals end abruptly in mid-sentence. The final page bears a single Latin phrase written hastily in red ink, Umbra regit, the shadow rules. It is also during this time that several papal bulls were issued without known origin. Officially, these documents bore the seal of Pope Urban VIII. But analysis of their language structure and theology reveals marked differences from his usual writings. One in particular, the Bull of Sanctum Concordia, issued in 1632, authorized a complete restructuring of monastic discipline across 4 nations. Urban, in private letters discovered later, seemed unaware of the bull's issuance. There are things he wrote in a note to his brother that bear my seal, but not my breath. The Vatican bureaucracy, always a web of overlapping offices and departments, was further obfuscated by the creation of the Congregatio Silenti, the Congregation of Silence. Founded in 1611 officially to handle delicate moral cases, it quickly expanded its reach. Its meetings were undocumented. Its members were unnamed. Its chamber had no windows, and its records were kept apart from the Archivum Vaticanum. And it is here, in the blurred lines between religious authority and invisible control, that we first detect the outline of the Black Pope. Not in Scripture, but in the footnotes of secret decrees. Not in paintings, but in erased names. Not in memory, but in fear. Even the architecture of the Vatican began to reflect this duality. Beneath the Apostolic Palace corridors were expanded into subterranean archives. Secret stairwells were added behind chapels. Rooms with no records of their creation appeared in revised maps. One room labeled only as Caecellum N appears briefly in a 1639 inventory, then disappears from all future documentation. A Jesuit who toured the vaults that year wrote in his diary, "There is a chapel in which no Mass is said. It is always lit, yet no candles are present. The walls are black. One does not speak there." We must also consider the black garments. While Jesuits traditionally wore black cassocks, a different style of robe appears in one painting from 1647, commissioned by a Florentine noble. In the background, partially obscured by shadow, stands a figure draped not in standard clerical garb, but in flowing black robes lined with dark crimson. His face is turned away. The painter, Sebastiano Ferrini, died less than a month after finishing the work. No records explain the cause. All these details fragments really would be easy to dismiss. Coincidences, artistic flourishes, mistaken identities. But when taken together, they form the outline of something more than myth. The Vatican did not deny these anomalies. It simply never addressed them. Silence, as always, was the chosen defense. And silence, as always, hides more than it reveals. Within these layers of ritual architecture and secrecy, we must ask again, if decisions were made without the Pope's full knowledge, then by whom? If doctrines were shaped by unseen hands, then whose hands moved the quill? Perhaps the answer lies not in the pages of church law, but in the empty spaces between them, in the hidden corners of cathedrals, in the corridors that turn without end, in the echo that answers only to itself. Not everything in the Vatican is seen. Not everything sacred is holy. And not every power wears white. The Black Pope, if he existed, was not a man. He was a mechanism, a shadow cast by the Son of the Church, perfectly still yet eternally present. And once you begin to look for him, he is everywhere. Never signed his name. He left no portrait. He was never ordained, never canonized, never even publicly acknowledged. Yet in the margins of the Vatican's most pivotal decisions, his presence is unmistakable. They called him by many names in whispers. The voice, the right hand, the gatekeeper. But the name that endured the name that passed through corridors and confessionals like a bitter draught in winter was the Black Pope. The term itself is a contradiction. Black, the color of absence and secrecy. Pope, the symbol of divine guidance and earthly authority. One in darkness, one in light. Together an impossibility. Yet the Church has always dealt in paradoxes, and this one, it seems, was no different. Officially, the Society of Jesus, known as the Jesuits, was led by its superior general. A man of letters and piety, stationed in Rome, sworn to obey the Pope and serve the Church's mission across the world. But there are traces buried deep within letters, codices, and unsigned directives of another figure who eclipsed even him. A superior without office. A command without question. A 1617 Jesuit correspondence from Antwerp mentions orders arriving in advance of the general. In a coded letter from a Bohemian mission in 1620, the phrase vox altera, the second voice, appears 5 times. These are not stylistic anomalies. They are fragments of a pattern that leads always back to Rome, yet never to a man with a name. Even Pope Paul V, widely known for his tight grip on ecclesiastical matters, once remarked in a letter to Cardinal Scipione Borghese, "There are decisions I do not make, and yet they are made. It is enough that they are right, though not mine." That sentence alone, buried in a private exchange, betrays something fundamental: that within the structure of absolute authority there existed an unspoken fissure, a place where power slipped away from the visible hierarchy and entered the void. In the mid-1600s, the Vatican undertook what scholars now refer to as the Quiet Reformation, a series of internal restructurings, dismissals, and new appointments that were never publicly declared, but that transformed the machinery of the Holy See. Archival notes refer to this era obliquely: reorganization for discretion, purgation of visible controls, reallocation of internal authority. Nowhere is any single individual credited with this overhaul. Yet the results were clear. Several cardinals were relieved of duties, a dozen foreign nuncios were recalled without explanation, and entire sections of the Vatican archives were sealed indefinitely. It is within this silence that the Black Pope most clearly emerges, not as a man, but as an orchestrator. Not a ghost, but a shadow behind every wall. He did not direct armies, yet wars followed his ripples. He did not draft decrees, yet his influence stained the parchment. He was never elected, yet he chose who could be. One of the few surviving references to his agency comes not from a theologian, but from a mathematician. In 1641, Giovanni Riccioli, Jesuit astronomer and philosopher, compiled a side volume of speculative essays written only for private circulation. In it, under the chapter on invisible forces in earthly hierarchies, he writes, "As the moon pulls the ocean without touch or voice, so too does one within the Vatican move the minds of men without title. He is the dark axis about which this world rotates, and his orbit is unrecorded." The essay was never published. Riccioli redacted the chapter days before final printing. The draft was found 2 centuries later, sewn into the lining of a stolen manuscript recovered in Prague. There is also the matter of the Jesuit trials in France. In 1661, under pressure from the French court, several senior Jesuit figures were accused of political interference. But during the investigations, a peculiar moment was recorded. One of the interrogators, a skeptical magistrate, noted in his journal that every accused member referred subtly to someone else, a man we serve but do not see. The inquiry collapsed without conclusion. Witnesses withdrew their testimony. The matter was sealed by royal order. The identity of this invisible superior was never named. But again and again the phrase recurred: "He is the one behind the throne." Historians have long argued that these illusions were exaggerations invented to justify failures or consolidate obedience. But what if they were true? What if, in a world ruled by hierarchies and secrets, such a figure was not only possible but necessary? Every kingdom, every empire has its shadow. Why would the Vatican, oldest of powers, most theatrical of governments, be any different? In one final curious document, hidden deep in a Jesuit training manual dated 1673, a passage stands out. Written in Latin, it reads, "You will be taught many things, but remember the loudest voice is not always the highest. There is another above and another below, and between them one who speaks only in silence. You will never see him, but he sees you. Signed with a single letter N. The signature appears nowhere else in the document. No name, no title, just the echo of a presence buried like a seed within the text. The Black Pope was never meant to be found. He was not a figure of legend, nor an agent of fantasy. He was the unanswered question, the figure just beyond the edge of illumination. Always watching, always one step ahead of discovery. And still in the archives that creak in the cold breath of Roman nights, his fingerprints remain. Not visible, but undeniable. There is a room beneath the Vatican that no map acknowledges. Its name does not appear in floor plans. Its key is said to have been lost or hidden centuries ago. Yet those who have wandered too far into the catacombs speak of it with the same reverence and fear reserved for relics of divine judgment. They call it the Black Chapel, located, as legends suggest, below the northeast quadrant of the Apostolic Palace. The chamber is not consecrated. It has never hosted Mass, nor baptism, nor blessing. It is not a place of light, but of silence. And it is here, according to suppressed testimonies and vanished travelogues, that the Black Pope convened his own form of liturgy, one of influence, not incense. The first mention of this room appears in a set of private diaries belonging to Father Ignazio Monteverde, a Vatican architect tasked with restoring the Pauline Chapel in the 1650s. Amid sketches of altars and measurements of marble columns, there is a crude charcoal-drawn map. No scale, no legend. Only stairwells that descend without end, ending in a circle marked S.N. Sicellum Nigrum. Monteverde's entries grow increasingly erratic in the weeks following this sketch. His handwriting deteriorates. The ink smudges. His final note reads, "The room is colder than death. Candles flicker without wind. I was not alone." The architect vanished 2 months later. His remains were never found. His belongings were quietly seized by Vatican officials. The sketch was presumed destroyed until a copy was discovered in 1937 by a German researcher, sewn into the lining of a second-hand ecclesiastical robe purchased in Florence. That map, now considered apocryphal by most institutions, bears undeniable consistency with Vatican tunnel systems unearthed during renovations in the 20th century. Beneath the known corridors, there are stone channels sealed by iron gates, their origins undocumented. Some lead nowhere. Others lead downward into areas where light does not remain. And yet, despite all this, the Church has never addressed the rumor of the Black Chapel. The silence again speaks volumes. There is further evidence, however faint, hidden in art. In a 1656 altarpiece painted by Francesco Naldini, now lost to time but once housed in a Jesuit chapel in Venice, the central figure is Christ. But look closely behind the throne, barely visible beneath the archway, stands a robed man in black, featureless, with one hand resting upon an open book. That book contains only one word, repeated silentium. The painting was removed within days of its unveiling. Witnesses claimed it inspired a fear too great to name. Naldini ceased painting shortly thereafter. Some say he was silenced. Others say he found faith too heavy to carry once he glimpsed the truth. Historians have debated whether the Black Chapel was ever real. Some believe it was a metaphor, a representation of inner hierarchy and clandestine authority. But too many independent sources reference it with details far too specific to be allegory. The obsidian walls, the ceiling without frescoes, the floor made not of stone, but of ash-colored tile arranged in concentric circles, circles that never meet. Most disturbing are the accounts of a presence felt there, not seen, not heard, but felt. Visitors who claimed to reach the chamber wrote of dizziness of a pressure behind the eyes, of hearing a voice that was not sound but certainty. A Jesuit named Balthazar del Toro, who wrote under a pseudonym in 1664, described the sensation: one kneels, though no altar stands. One prays, though no faith is demanded. One leaves, but something remains behind. His writings were confiscated days after publication. He was defrocked, quietly sent to a monastery, and never wrote again. The floor pattern of the Black Chapel, those concentric circles, has appeared elsewhere in unrelated contexts. In the margin of a Spanish king's death decree, in the architectural blueprints of a ruined abbey in Poland, in the etching of a forgotten tomb in Avignon. Always the same geometry, always uncredited. Some believe it is the symbol of the real power that governed the Church, not the gospel, but the gate. A gate that did not open into heaven, but into the hidden will of men who feared nothing but exposure. One recurring phrase appears in several of these mysterious inscriptions: ad ostium sine lumine. At the door without light. It is possible that the Black Pope, if he ever existed, stood at that door. Not to guard it, but to open it. To let pass only those who understood the weight of power without the burden of title. Only those who ruled through influence, not decree. Through silence, not proclamation. To enter the Black Chapel was to step outside the visible church, to leave behind ceremony, and kneel instead before the machinery of eternity. And so the room remains possibly bricked in, possibly buried, possibly only ever imagined. But in the folds of Vatican silence, even imagination takes form. The Black Chapel, no mass, no name, no light. And somewhere within its walls a decision was made that turned the fate of nations without ever being recorded. Were meant to be the Church's most loyal servants, soldiers without swords, scholars without pride. The Jesuits' Societas Iesu were founded with fire in their hearts and obedience in their marrow. But history teaches that obedience, when sharpened to an extreme, becomes a weapon of its own. By the 17th century, the Jesuit order had grown from a band of spiritual militants into an invisible empire. Their influence stretched across continents. In the New World, they baptized kings. In the East, they debated Confucian scholars. In Europe, they whispered into the ears of monarchs. But behind their public vows lay a structure that few understood. And at its center, according to forbidden texts and suppressed letters, was not merely the superior general, but something or someone above him. They called him in certain French records le second silence. In Spanish, la voz que no habla, the voice that does not speak. In Latin, umbra magistra, the shadow teacher. Officially, the superior general was answerable only to the Pope. But several intercepted communications suggest otherwise. In a coded letter from 1612, found hidden in the spine of a burned Jesuit hymnal in Lyon, one passage reads, "The will has been made known. Rome obeys before it understands. It is unclear whose will is being referenced." The Pope. The general, or the unnamed authority that began to surface, always implied, never identified, just after the death of Ignatius of Loyola, the order's founder. Jesuit structure was famously hierarchical. Every province had its superior. every school its rector, every missionary his chain of command. But above the general was only God, or so it seemed. And yet strange discrepancies began to appear in the 17th century. Provincial orders arrived without record of authorship. Missions were redirected on the eve of departure. In 1635, an entire Jesuit college in Naples was closed overnight. Its students dispersed, its faculty reassigned. No official reason was given. Only an internal memo remains stamped with a sigil resembling the eye in the triangle, an image never used in Jesuit heraldry. The seal is referred to again in the journals of a Portuguese Jesuit brother, Manuel Escobar, who in 1647 wrote, "We do not know him. We do not speak of him. But we feel his direction like the tide beneath our boats." Escobar died the same year reportedly of fever, though no physician ever examined his body. His journal disappeared for 300 years before resurfacing in a London estate sale. It was around this time that the Jesuits began facing increasing scrutiny, not from Rome but from monarchies: France, Spain, Portugal. All began to fear what the Church would not name, that the order no longer answered to the Pope alone. That, somewhere in the twisting corridors of Rome, there lived a figure outside the light, but inside every decision. In 1650, King John IV of Portugal issued a secret memorandum to his council. In it, he warned of a force within the Church that masks itself in devotion, but speaks with many tongues. It commands without blessing. It influences without love. It has no face, but all obey. The document was classified and forgotten. It was rediscovered in 1991, misfiled beneath agricultural records. Historians often speak of the Jesuits' expulsion from various kingdoms as reactions to their political entanglements. But what if those entanglements were not of their own making? What if they were in fact following orders from something higher than even their visible superior? Whispers among former members of the society tell of closed rooms in Rome where meetings were held without records. Of a man in black who sat behind a curtain never speaking, but whose mere presence was understood as instruction. They describe a liturgy of control ritual not for God but for dominion, a worship not of the divine but of order itself. One former Jesuit, writing under a pseudonym in Amsterdam, claimed to have seen the Black Pope. He wore no crown, the letter reads. He held no crucifix. But his silence filled the room. We could not look at him, and we did not need to. He was there. That was enough. This letter was considered a forgery by most scholars. But within the same decade, another document, this time from an English ambassador to Rome, mentions a silent man dressed in robes darker than night, whose arrival coincided with the sudden reversal of several Vatican positions. The patterns are undeniable. When monarchs resisted Rome, they were not answered with armies, but with trade collapses and public scandals. When dissent grew within the Church, it was not extinguished with flame, but with silence. The kind of silence that rewrites history, that removes names from books, that reshapes truth without argument. And at the center of this quiet force was the Black Pope. Not a figure of theater, but of calculus. He made no speeches rote, no encyclicals, declared no wars. But where he passed, maps changed, alliances shifted, and rulers fell. The Jesuits were his arms, the Vatican his instrument, the world his ledger, and no one, not even the Supreme Pontiff, could move without the echo of that unseen breath behind him. The spring of 1610, a meeting was held in Rome. It was not recorded in the Vatican calendar. No minutes were taken. No names were listed. And yet, from that silent gathering, the course of Europe bent. The meeting took place beneath the Apostolic Palace in a room long since sealed. Its original purpose was administrative and archive for papal letters. But by the 17th century, it had acquired another reputation: Camera Ignota, the unknown chamber. Invitations were not sent. They arrived. Each written on parchment, dyed a strange gray sealed not with wax, but with a pressed sigil resembling a coiled serpent. The recipients were not the most famous men in Europe, but they were the most powerful. A Spanish emissary known for dissolving alliances without battle. A French cardinal who had never been photographed. A Habsburg agent believed dead since Prague. And one man from within the Vatican itself whose name has never been recovered. Only his title survives, etched into the margin of a single letter, Praeco Umbrarum, Herald of Shadows. What occurred in that room has never been documented. But the effects unmistakable began almost immediately. Within weeks, King Henry IV of France was dead. Stabbed by a religious fanatic in a crowded street, though his route that day had been changed at the last moment for reasons unknown. The assassin acted alone. So they said. Yet his letters confiscated and sealed by royal decree were never opened to the public. One note recovered briefly before disappearance read, "Only the Lamb has been chosen." At the same time, Spain withdrew its claims to key Italian provinces. Officially, the decision was to preserve peace. Unofficially, it weakened the Spanish crown just as Protestant forces in the north began to stir. The timing too perfect, the benefit too precise. Then came the restructuring of the Papal Guard. Dozens of officers reassigned, some removed entirely. One, a captain who had served 3 popes, was found drowned in the Tiber with his hands bound in rosary beads. The investigation was quiet. No charges were filed. His family received no funeral. All of this, historians have argued, was the natural ebb and flow of an era in turmoil. But scattered among letters, marginal notes, and confiscated testimonies are references to a deeper cause. A plan known only as Concordia Obscura, the Dark Concord. A secret pact, never signed, only spoken. Its terms were simple. Europe must not fall apart. Not publicly. Division was acceptable provided it remained unseen. Rebellion could be tolerated, but only under watch. The map must change, but only under the hand of the unseen cartographer. And who was that hand? In one fragment from the Venetian archives, now lost a monk describes a vision. A man stands over Europe with no face. He moves pieces across the board, but there are no pieces. Only kings. The monk was declared mad. He died within the week. Further evidence lies in the adjustments made to the Gregorian calendar minor, seemingly trivial changes to the liturgical cycle. But these changes created overlaps in Catholic observance that aligned with key political anniversaries. Coronations, treaties, deaths. Coincidence, perhaps. But the alignment is so consistent it cannot be ignored. One French diplomat, Charles de Vigny, was said to have attended the 1610 meeting. In his memoir, published only posthumously and heavily redacted, he writes, "I heard no voice yet obeyed. I saw no man yet signed. The agreement was made not in ink, but in fear." That line was later removed from the official copy. The original manuscript vanished in 1812. The notion of a silent pact negotiated not by monarchs or popes, but by intermediaries with no official role recasts our entire understanding of that century. The war that raged across Central Europe, the rise of Protestant influence, the ebb of papal authority, and yet the Vatican remained untouched, vulnerable in appearance, unshaken in reality. It was as if someone knew exactly how much chaos could be allowed before collapse, as if someone had calculated the breaking point and hovered forever just beneath it. No voice was loud, no command was written, but decisions were made and they echoed across kingdoms. And at the center of that silent storm, if the accounts are to be believed, stood a man whose very title was a contradiction. Not pope, not prince, not general, but simply the Black One, the Black Voice, the Black Pope. No throne, no ring, no robes, only the room, only the echo. The camera ignota has since been sealed, its entrance bricked over, its history denied. Yet among Vatican engineers the legend persists. If you stand near the northeast stairwell at midnight, you can feel warmth on the stone, not heat, but pressure. As if a door waits beneath listening. The 1610 meeting changed nothing officially. No war was declared. No pope was replaced. No edict was issued. But in the span of 2 months, 5 monarchs altered policy. 3 armies rerouted their campaigns, and the Jesuits restructured half their schools across Europe. And still no signature, no seal, no record. Only the silence, only the shadow. And the growing question, who in that room truly held the world in his hand. Death was never a stranger to the Vatican. But some deaths arrive not as punishment or plague, but as warnings. Between 1610 and 1667, a pattern emerged. A sequence of demises so precisely timed, so meticulously quiet, that they seemed less like acts of fate and more like sentences. Each man, learned connected and inconvenient, died under circumstances described publicly as sudden, natural, or holy. But within the margins of their obituaries, another story lingers. The first was Cardinal Girolamo Arci, an advisor to Pope Paul V, and a critic of the Jesuit influence in France. He was last seen entering the subterranean archives of the Vatican on a Thursday evening in March 1611. He never returned. The official report stated that he died of heart failure in his quarters, but his room had not been entered. The guards had not seen him leave, and his last written sentence unfinished on parchment found by his bedside read, "The silence speaks where the throne cannot." The second was Father Miguel Ramirez, a Spanish mathematician priest assigned to decipher encoded documents in the Vatican library. He had begun cross-referencing letters between Habsburg envoys and unnamed Vatican officials. According to a surviving page from his private journal, he believed the communications had been altered, erased, redirected, rewritten by an invisible hand. His final note stated, "There is a signature that signs without name." 3 days later, he was found dead at his desk, a single drop of blood on his lip. There were no wounds. The third case reached beyond the Vatican into the French court. Nicolas de la Reynie, a judicial agent under Louis XIV and early pioneer of organized intelligence, had compiled a list of covert Jesuit activities he believed to be influencing national policy. Among the sealed pages of his report was a diagram, a triangle within a circle connected by 7 lines to major cities across Europe, Rome at the center. The report never reached the king. La Reynie was found drowned in a shallow fountain in his private garden, though no signs of struggle were noted. The report was recovered, but the diagram had been removed. These deaths were not officially connected. No conspiracy was declared. No investigations were launched. Each man was buried with honors, each name erased quietly from subsequent records, and yet there were whispers that mentioned a chamber deep within the apostolic palace, where confessions were not forgiven but collected, where knowledge was not archived but buried, where visitors left nothing behind except their breath, their fear, and sometimes their lives. The Vatican's silence was absolute, but in distant abbeys among lesser clergy tales endured, of a man whose footsteps left no echo, of a voice that issued neither commands nor blessings, but left those who heard it unable to disobey. He had no office, no mitre, no ring, but he moved popes like pawns and kings like dust. In a restricted letter from 1649, now housed in a hidden Jesuit vault in Krakow, one superior writes to another, "The hand has touched the circle. One of ours will fall. It is already decided." The recipient of the letter died 1 week later of sudden illness with no symptoms, no fever, and no warning. Even more unsettling is the account of Father Augustine Kolb, a German Benedictine who had by chance entered a forgotten passage during a Vatican visit. He later wrote, "I reached a hall made of dark stone. There were no statues, no light, but something watched me. I did not hear words yet. I understood I was not meant to be there. I fled." Kolb never returned to Rome. He became a recluse and was later declared insane. The Black Pope, if he existed, left no fingerprints, but he left something stronger absence, an absence that reshaped events without ever taking form. These men who died did not fall because of what they knew. They fell because of what they had begun to suspect. The moment they looked beyond the visible hierarchy, they ceased to be useful. And usefulness in the realm of shadows is the only currency. In 1655, one final death punctuated the pattern. A young Swiss canon named Andreas von Loret was invited to assist with a classified translation of a papal document known only as Speculum Occulti. He wrote home only once, stating, "I have seen a page not meant for eyes. I believe I now understand who writes the unwritten." He was found 2 days later at the base of the Scala Regia, the grand staircase of the Vatican. Officially, he tripped. The body was removed before sunrise. There is no record of the Speculum Occulti. No scholar admits to having seen it. No copy survives. But in 1971, a fragment of a manuscript was unearthed in the ruins of a Jesuit college in Belgium. In Latin, it read, "He who speaks not commands all. He who is forgotten shapes memory. He who is no one is everyone." Below it, faintly scratched in old ink, N. What do these deaths mean? Martyrdom, punishment, or simply removal? To control history, one must control what is remembered. But to control memory, one must first silence the witnesses. And the Black Pope, if he lived, was the master of silence. It was not only words and witnesses that were silenced. Symbols, too, were swallowed into the dark. Every power leaves a mark. Kings carve their crests into coins. Empires brand their banners onto stone. The Church emblazons keys and mitres across basilicas. But some marks are not made to be seen. They are made to be recognized only by those who already understand. Among the strangest discoveries buried in Vatican documents is a recurring sigil, subtle, almost always hidden, and never officially acknowledged. A single eye encased in a triangle encircled by a coiled serpent swallowing its own tail. The eye stares upward, not outward. The tail never ends. This symbol, found carved into the underside of a bishop's chair in Avignon, inked in faded pigment on the back of a dismissed papal bull from 1623, and etched with trembling care into the margin of a single Jesuit mathematics codex, has no entry in any heraldic registry. It is not associated with any religious order, and yet it reappears again and again on documents linked to unexplained decisions, abrupt deaths, or quiet redirections of global policy. The Church does not speak of it. Most clergy, if shown the image, pretend not to see. But among archivists and forbidden historians, it is known by one name, Sigillum Obscurum, the seal of the hidden. Its meaning is debated. Some believe it is a symbol of perfect surveillance, that the eye represents the hidden observer, the architect of every decision, the silent witness behind the Pope. Others suggest it is not a symbol at all, but a warning, an echo of ancient Gnostic fear, where the divine is unknowable and the world ruled by the unseen. In one confiscated treatise by a defrocked Italian monk, the seal is described as a counter-host, a spiritual inversion of the Eucharist. Not a communion of flesh and blood, but of will and obedience. To mark with the seal, he writes, is not to bless, but to bind. He was burned in Modena for heresy. The Black Pope, if he existed, never declared a creed. But this seal, many believe, was his silent insignia. It required no proclamation. Those who saw it understood. One such instance appears in the Liber Tabularum, an internal Vatican ledger never released to the public. Dated 1644, the ledger tracks the assignment of resources to unnamed missions in Bohemia, northern Italy, and Bavaria. At the top of the page, in place of a title, is the seal. No words, no headings, just the eye, the triangle, the serpent. What makes the page significant is that the three missions it records all coincided with sudden shifts in Protestant Catholic hostilities. Each ended with an unexplained withdrawal of forces. Each resulted in the mysterious deaths of multiple clergy, and each months later was followed by the installation of new Jesuit rectors in key educational institutions. No author signed the ledger. The writing, crisp and severe, bears no resemblance to any of the known Vatican scribes. Another trace of the symbol appears carved into the wooden beams beneath the floor of the Sala Regia, the royal hall where popes greet kings. It was discovered in 1938 during routine repairs and immediately covered with lead plating. A photograph was taken, but the negative was later destroyed in a fire. One surviving copy exists, grainy and smudged, in the possession of a private collector in Zurich. Those who have seen it describe the seal as perfectly symmetrical, almost machine-cut and older than the surrounding wood. Was the symbol a mark of jurisdiction? A signature? A spiritual sigil binding those who acted in its shadow? In a forbidden text, recovered from a Jesuit abbey in Poland, now believed to be one of only 3 ever written under the name N. A passage suggests a ritual unspoken, unsanctioned, used to swear fealty to a higher authority. He who sees the seal, it reads, does not look upon it. He enters it. He kneels not before a throne, but a silence. There are also reports impossible to verify of a medallion bearing the same symbol passed hand to hand among a select group of curial officials during the mid-17th century. Its possession granted not status but immunity. The wearer could walk corridors no others entered. Here, confessions never spoken aloud speak with a voice not their own. The medallion, according to rumor, was last seen in 1689, clutched in the hand of a dying man who had no name and wore no robes, and still in the Cathedral of St. John. Lateran, where every pope is enthroned, a single tile in the apse floor, bears a strange discoloration barely visible to the eye. But under the right light the seal emerges, not painted, not carved, burned. Who placed it there, and why? Some believe the seal was meant only for those within the deeper orders of obedience, a sign that they were being watched, protected, or judged. Others believe it was not created by the Black Pope, but predates him, that he, like all powers before him, merely inherited it, became its custodian, its slave. One theory, whispered only by the most reckless scholars, is that the Black Pope was never a man at all, but the role demanded by the seal. That whoever wore the medallion, entered the chapel, read the unnamed pages, became him, and when he died, another took his place. The seal remains. The triangle endures. The eye still watches. And in every generation, one man steps forward, not to lead, but to disappear behind the curtain. He becomes the voice that does not speak. The seal has no time, no era, only presence, and presence in the dark halls of power is all that is required. Power does not move in straight lines. It flows in patterns subtle, repeating hidden in plain sight. In the 17th century, Europe was a continent of crowns, but behind each crown stood something older, something quieter, something that did not need to rule publicly because it had already written the script. Across the courts of Austria, France, and Spain, the same strange pattern began to emerge, patterns invisible to the eye, but unmistakable to those who studied correspondence, shifting treaties, and the slow turning of thrones. The Habsburg Empire, largest of Catholic powers, adjusted its alliances not through public debate, but through brief, unsigned memoranda passed directly to the monarch's chamber. The handwriting was uniform, curved, deliberate, but the source was unknown. The messages were delivered by men who vanished after their task. Not diplomats, not clergy. Messengers of a different kind. France, long torn between religion and absolutism, began to centralize power under Louis XIII with uncharacteristic smoothness. Jesuit schools spread like veins through noble families. Confessors became advisors. Advisors became policymakers. At least 3 were later revealed to have received instructions from an unnamed source in Rome. One described him in a single surviving letter as the man whose title is not spoken aloud. Spain, racked by debt and discontent, chose retreat over conquest in critical moments. In 1625, it withdrew from a major strategic position in Naples. No military pressure existed. No internal rebellion prompted it. The order came by papal courier, yet the Pope denied issuing it. The ambassador who carried the command could not name the author, only that he had been summoned to a locked room in the Lateran at midnight. The only thing he remembered afterward was the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, in the dark. From a distance, these were political adjustments, realignments, but viewed together they form something else, a choreography. Not chaos, but orchestration. Not mere diplomacy, but the execution of a design invisible to the very men who followed it. In a forgotten chamber of the Austrian State Archives, a single parchment was found in 1893. Written in French with notes in Latin, it appears to be a briefing. The text outlines planned changes in ecclesiastical authority across 7 kingdoms. Each change corresponds exactly with what would unfold over the next 30 years. At the bottom of the document, beneath the final notation, is a symbol, a black circle with no markings. And beside it, in faint ink, the phrase, "We hold the axis," no one knows who wrote it. No pope claimed it. No monarch requested it. And yet it foretold the resignation of bishops, the promotion of cardinals, the deaths of 4 political enemies of Rome, and the burning of a Protestant library in the Netherlands. The phrase, "we hold the axis," reappears in only one other known place in the personal notebook of Cardinal Francesco Barberini, a man deeply embedded in papal politics. His notes suggest the existence of what he called the Second Table, an inner circle of counsel that superseded even the College of Cardinals. He never named them, only referred to their authority as older than Rome. Barberini's notes were seized upon his death. Only fragments remain. But in those fragments he writes the Pope rules by light. But there is a second deeper sun hidden from the sky, but from which all warmth comes. It does not shine. It burns. This is not theology. It is instruction. And as Barberini's notes end, another figure enters the historical record, though only by silhouette. A Jesuit courier passing through Prague was arrested under suspicion of espionage. He carried nothing but a folded map and a sealed letter. The map curiously depicted no cities, only lines, paths that connected Paris to Vienna, Rome to Madrid, Lisbon to Krakow. Along each path, a single marking a triangle with a dot at its center. When interrogated, the courier claimed to know nothing. The letter bore no signature, only the phrase, "The breath moves east next." He died during interrogation. The cause was never determined. The idea that a hidden force directed the reshaping of Europe has long been dismissed as conspiracy. But the facts remain. Treaties were signed between enemies without formal negotiation. Political exiles were welcomed by bishops before their arrival was public. Prophecies, published only in underground theological tracts, came true with precision, too precise, too frequent. As kingdoms fell and borders shifted, the Vatican stood unchanged. Touched, perhaps, but never wounded. It adapted not through strength, but anticipation. The Black Pope, if he lived, was not watching history. He was writing it in silence. And Europe, its kings, its wars, its crumbling maps, was simply turning a page. Corridor beneath the apostolic palace that appears on no tourist guide, no modern schematic, and no official blueprint. It is older than the Sistine Chapel, older than the Vatican museums, perhaps even older than the Renaissance itself. Its stones are darker than the surrounding masonry, smooth with age and cold to the touch. They call it the Corridor of No Doors. Mention of it exists only in fragments. Notes scrawled by archivists who dared to explore too far, whispered by aging sacristans who spoke only in Latin when describing what they saw. It is said to begin at a false wall near the Scala Pia, and to descend at a gentle slope, unmarked narrow, lit only by natural draughts that carry no scent. Those who have walked it, few and nameless, report the same sensation, not fear, but displacement. As if the world above had been left behind. As if the walls themselves were watching. And somewhere near its end the passage stops abruptly at a black door with no handle. The door is older than the corridor. It is said to be made of iron and basalt, and bears no keyhole, no knocker, no symbol. But in certain reports under candlelight, faint etchings have been seen lines that resemble concentric circles surrounding a hollow center. A mouth, some say. A void. On the Vatican's oldest surviving architectural map, dated 1551, the door is labeled Porta Nigrum, the Black Door. No record explains what lies behind it. No document acknowledges who sealed it, but in the year 1667, a set of anonymous notes was discovered in the private files of a now lost Monsignor. These pages, yellowed and brittle, describe a visit made by two unknown men, escorted by 3 Swiss guards down the corridor in the middle of the night. No torch was carried. The men walked in silence. When they reached the black door, one of the guards withdrew a scroll from his robes and read from it not aloud, but silently, line by line, as if in prayer. And then the door opened. The guard never spoke again. The scroll was burned. The visitors were not seen again in the Vatican. These notes were confiscated within hours and quietly archived. But one phrase was copied into the margins by the Monsignor's apprentice, hidden beneath layers of Latin abbreviation. It reads, "He waits where no light follows." What does that mean? Who waits and for whom? Theories, of course, abound. That the black door conceals a private chapel older than the papal throne. That it leads to a chamber of records never meant to be read. That it is a prison, and the man who resides behind it is not dead, but simply never permitted to leave. More radical voices speak of a second, see a hidden seat of spiritual governance, unblessed, unholy, but binding. A chair not of Peter, but of silence. A place where the true decisions are made, where the popes of light are advised by the voice that wears no face. There is circumstantial evidence that this hidden governance influenced the conclaves of 1621 and 1644. Letters between French and Austrian cardinals make repeated vague references to pre-consultation, a term which appears nowhere in church law. One letter states, "He who must approve has already spoken, though none of us have heard him." The same letter is signed only with the symbol of the eye. More compelling still is a ritual noted in the training of select Vatican scribes during the mid-17th century. Before receiving full access to sensitive material, they were required to descend into the sub-basement archives and stand for 3 hours in silence before a sealed chamber marked only with the Roman numeral N. Those who endured were promoted. Those who refused were reassigned. One man broke the silence. He reportedly asked, "What is in that room?" The response, according to the unofficial record, "Nothing." And in that, nothing, everything. He left the priesthood days later and disappeared into obscurity. The existence of the corridor of no doors of the Black Door itself has never been confirmed. But there are those who claim to have felt the shift in temperature when standing near its suspected location. Felt the dissonance in the stone. The way sound dies before it reaches the wall. Some claim it is not merely a door, but a threshold. That, on the other side, waits not a person, but a principle, a convergence of will, memory, and command, bound into a single presence that does not need to act because its shadow already bends the world. If the Black Pope had a throne, perhaps this was it. Not adorned, not displayed, but hidden, silent, absolute. And if so, it is still there, waiting, listening. Behind the door that no one opens in the corridor that leads nowhere, the future was once written, and perhaps still is. Vatican, there is a room that no one speaks of, yet every scholar suspects. Not the secret archives whose name alone invites attention. Not the locked vaults of doctrine or the sealed wings of St. Peter's Library. This room has no title, no guards, no access list. Its presence is known not by announcement, but by absence. It is called, by those who dare whisper of it, the archive of darkness. Not darkness as metaphor, but as condition. No window, No flame, no reflection, only dust stone and the gravity of buried truth. The first suggestion of its existence appears in an overlooked footnote of a 1652 inventory, compiled after the sudden collapse of a corridor near the Vatican Library. Among the damaged rooms listed for inspection, one bears no name, only a code Archivum Tenebris. The record ends without details. No repairs were commissioned. No further entries follow. Yet 4 years later, a letter from a Jesuit historian in Florence mentions having seen what should not be stored, let alone remembered. The letter was intercepted and destroyed. A single line survives, written in the margin of another document found in his personal effects. Even God turns his face from this room. What might such a room contain? Theories differ. Some claim it holds forbidden gospels, textual ghosts rejected not for heresy, but for accuracy, manuscripts that undermine the authority of both Rome and Empire. Others speak of records too precise to be coincidence letters that trace the fall of monarchs months before their deaths, documents predicting outbreaks, revolutions, assassinations. Not prophecy, but design. A more dangerous theory suggests the room holds the Liber Obscuritatis, the Book of Darkness, a manuscript without known author passed only from hand to hand among the chosen few. Bound in black leather, its pages are said to shimmer faintly as though resisting the ink. It contains not spells nor visions, but instructions. Directives issued from a source unknown yet obeyed across centuries. Not religious law, but operational doctrine for something deeper than church. A Jesuit cryptographer, Father Angelo Verratti, once confessed privately to having seen a single page. He described the script as living, and the content as too rational to be human. He died from apparent self-inflicted wounds 4 days later. No note was found. One surviving line, allegedly memorized by a colleague, read, "All visible power is already obsolete." It is said that access to the archive of darkness is granted not through keys, but through surrender. The chosen are led down blind corridors. They are stripped of titles, then names, then questions. When they arrive, they do not ask what is inside. They are told only this: you already know it. In 1666, amid the flames that consumed much of London, a message arrived at the Vatican, a single scrap of paper, smuggled in the lining of a Protestant scholar's robe. It contained a crude map bearing only 4 points: Geneva, Prague, Avignon, and Rome. A black dot pulsed at the center, surrounded by handwritten text in Greek. Translated, it read, "The fire was not the first, nor will it be the last. The archive remembers all." To suggest that the Vatican keeps such a chamber is to imply that it knows too much, that it is not simply preserving truth, but manufacturing silence, that it curates not only what mankind remembers, but what mankind is permitted to forget. The Black Pope, if he existed, would not have ruled from the altar, nor even from the corridor behind the altar. He would have ruled from within this darkness, with no throne, no crown, only knowledge, a kind of power more ancient than doctrine and more precise than law. He would not have needed a guard. The archive itself would protect him. Its contents so sensitive, so destabilizing, that their very existence would prevent their use. A paradox of absolute leverage. And perhaps this is why no rebellion ever reached the core. Why no schism, no heresy, no revolution, no matter how loud, ever truly pierced the center. Because the center was not made of faith, but of memory. Controlled memory. selective, precise, unrelenting. The archive of darkness was not a room. It was a decision to collect the unacceptable, to preserve the impossible, to protect the church not with truth, but with the thread of truth. And perhaps within that sealed chamber among the endless shelves and unmarked boxes, the Black Pope still walks, not in body, but in thought, in method, in consequence. For if silence is the currency of power, then memory is its bank, and some banks are buried too deep to ever be robbed. Maps in the Vatican that do not chart geography. They hang in no museum, and no tour guide mentions them. Folded between centuries-old scrolls or tucked inside forgotten missals, they appear as illustrations, decorations, or fragments of architectural planning. But to those who know, they are not maps of land, but of alignment. These are the tethered points, first referenced in a coded letter from 1618, recovered from the personal archive of a Jesuit astronomer. The tethered points form a network of sacred and political locations across Europe. Not random cities, not arbitrary churches, but precise coordinates. Each one historically a place of spiritual rupture, political upheaval, or miraculous silence. Rome, Avignon, Prague, Montserrat, Roslin, Krakow, Aachen, Santiago, and always, always Jerusalem. These places were not linked by roads, but by decisions, not by pilgrimage, but by something more ancient, a thread that ran beneath them, a pulsing current hidden from the eye, but not from the will that governed them. According to suppressed documents recovered during the Napoleonic looting of the Vatican, the Church maintained a map not of terrain, but of influence. A geometric lattice drawn in faint gold leaf over vellum, so old it cracked in the breath. At each node, a symbol, a triangle surrounding a smaller circle. The same sigil repeated endlessly, each pointing inward toward a blank center. What lay at the center was never labeled, but the map itself bore a name scratched faintly into the border in Latin Ordo Cordis, Saesi, the Order of the Blind Heart. No order by that name ever existed officially. No records appear in papal registries, Jesuit rolls, or inquisitorial logs, and yet in letters spanning more than a century the name recurs. Never explained, never discussed, always in passing, as if its meaning was not to be taught but remembered. The blind heart did not refer to faith as some claimed, but to something else, something colder, more deliberate. The heart that directs not because it sees, but because it beats. According to one Jesuit letter dated 1632, the map was not only for study, it was an instrument, a guide to pressure points, places where influence could be applied subtly and where the effect would ripple silently outward. A death here, a marriage there. A bishop moved a library, burned a printing press, funded a rumor whispered. From each act no explosion, no trumpet, only change. And at the center of these decisions stood not the Pope, not the councils, but the keeper of the thread. The man or office who read the map not as possibility, but as design. The Black Pope, not a ruler, but a cartographer of consequence. The stories claim he did not issue commands. He issued silence. His gestures were mathematical, his influence gravitational, and wherever the threads converged, wherever the lines pulsed, hardest, his shadow fell first. In 1644, a fire consumed the abbey of Monte San Giovanni just outside Naples. Inside, were held manuscripts on geomantic theology studies of ley lines and correspondences between Vatican architects and unknown patrons. Witnesses reported seeing a man in black robes arrive the night before the fire. He spoke to no one. He touched nothing. But after he left, the abbey burned. No body was found. Among the recovered ashes, a single brass medallion, not melted, not tarnished. On it, the symbol, the triangle, the circle, and one word, nexus. Was this a token A warning or a key? One theory holds that the Black Pope used these points not to control nations, but to balance them. That his purpose was not domination, but preservation of order, too fragile for daylight. That he did not act from belief, but from calculation. If one bishop rose, another must fall. If a truth was revealed, another must be hidden. If a heresy was born, a saint must be elevated. Not because heaven demanded it, but because equilibrium did. In this sense, he was not a villain, nor a savior, but a variable, a human fulcrum balancing the weight of history in silence. And perhaps that is why no war, no schism, no revolt ever wholly succeeded. Because for every plan laid in public, there was another already at work beneath the floorboards, not in opposition, not in alliance, but in preparation. Today the map is gone, the coordinates forgotten, but the architecture remains, in the layout of certain cathedrals, in the placement of shrines, in the calendar of saints that align not with birth or death, but with political tides. And some say the thread still pulses, that somewhere beneath Rome in a chamber without name, the last copy of the map remains open, watched not by a man, but by the office that outlives men. The office that wears no vestments needs no prayers, and answers only to necessity. And the beat of the blind heart continues. No monument, no tomb, no epitaph. And yet, in the deepest records of the Church, among the papers marked not with ink, but with absence, there is the shape of a man who never officially lived. The final known trace of the one they called the Black Pope does not come from a Vatican decree or a papal ledger. It comes from a private letter unsent found tucked inside a book of Gregorian chant in the personal library of a cloistered Benedictine monk in 1694. The letter was addressed to no one. It bore no date, no closing, no signature, only the letter N written once at the top. The contents were short, measured, final. I have fulfilled what was required. The order is preserved. The voice ends with me. That was all. The paper, worn at the edges, had been folded many times, and though the ink was faded, the impression of pressure of a steady, deliberate hand was still clear centuries later. This letter might have been dismissed as fiction had it not been accompanied by something else, a ring, simple, unadorned, made of iron, not gold. No jewels, no crest. Only a single symbol etched along the inner band, a circle perfectly closed. The monk who found it, Brother Amadeo, never left his monastery again. In the last entry of his personal journal, he wrote, "I have touched the edge of something older than choice." The ring, like the letter, vanished shortly thereafter. The implication, terrible in its simplicity, was this: the Black Pope had chosen to end the line, to close the thread, to allow silence to return to silence. But can such a thing end? Some believe the role was passed not to another man, but to the structure itself. That once the system of obedience and selective memory was complete, it no longer required a keeper. That the Vatican had grown into a machine capable of guiding itself from the shadows. Others argue that he never died at all, that the Black Pope was never a man in the mortal sense, but an idea, a system that wore flesh when needed, then withdrew into concept. That the voice returns when silence grows too loud. This theory is echoed in the final known testimony from a Jesuit novice recorded under oath in 1701. The boy, aged 17, claimed to have seen a man enter the forbidden corridor beneath the Vatican. He described the man's movement as unnatural, as though the walls turned around him, not the other way. He was dismissed as mentally unfit and sent to isolation. He died there. But before his death, he wrote the same phrase 100 times in the chalk, along the stone walls of his chamber. He is not gone. He is waiting. Waiting for what? A crisis large enough to fracture the hierarchy. A heresy so precise it slips past doctrine. A war not of swords, but of information. Or perhaps waiting is the point, because power of this kind, true power, does not act. It waits. It waits in the turning of pages, the gaps in memory, the laws that are signed without reading. It waits in the way a bishop is moved across the world without cause, in how a doctrine is softened not by debate, but by time. It waits in the silence after a question that no one dares to ask. In this way, the Black Pope may never have vanished. He may only have become more perfect, no longer needing voice or vessel. The Church moves. The world adjusts. The corridors remain dark. And in the patterns of history, if you look closely, the signs return. The triangle, the circle, the ring with no name, and one phrase encoded again and again in documents denied, redacted and buried. Obscurum regit, the darkness rules, and perhaps it always has. History, certain roles were never recorded, only assumed. They leave no trails in the books of saints, no statues in cathedral alcoves. They operate not in the light of sanctity, but in the folds between scripture and silence. These roles exist to ensure that history moves in one direction, even when the wind of reform threatens to scatter it. One such role was known in only a handful of encoded manuscripts as the Gatekeeper, not a guardian of keys, not a figure of ceremony, but the one who decides what crosses the threshold between memory and oblivion, between secrecy and disclosure. According to the writings of a Venetian librarian exiled in 1703, the Gatekeeper was neither pope nor king, but obeyed by both. His authority derived not from election, nor blood, nor miracle, but from necessity. He was the fulcrum, the counterbalance, the one who turned the wheel behind the wheel. This role, the librarian claimed, passed not by succession, but by recognition. One gatekeeper knew the next, not through conversation, not through instruction, but through silence, the silence of mutual awareness. They do not meet, he wrote. They remember each other forward. The idea suggests an unbroken chain of nameless actors stretching across centuries, each one inheriting the burden of influence in the shadows of faith. And though the Church denies any such mechanism, the patterns suggest otherwise. In 1707, during the papacy of Clement XIII, a series of sudden decisions took place within the Curia. 3 bishops were relocated. A Jesuit general was retired without cause. The Pontifical Academy was redirected from astronomy to ethics. No justification was made public. No minutes of discussion survive. But in one note from a Spanish nuncio, the events were described as preordained. The word choice was deliberate. 2 weeks later, a fire erupted in the Vatican printing press. Officially, it was deemed an accident. But eyewitnesses described a man leaving the premises moments before the blaze, tall, cloaked unseen in any record. A similar figure appears in a dream diary written by a Polish Carmelite nun in 1711. She describes him as the man without a face whose shadow entered before him. Though her writings were dismissed as spiritual metaphor, the image matches a woodcut illustration found decades later in a suppressed Jesuit tract, an illustration labeled only Portarius. The gatekeeper, not a name, a function, and if the gatekeeper was the inheritor of the Black Pope's will, then he served not by authority, but by restraint. His power lay not in action, but in prevention. He determined what was too dangerous to be known, what knowledge must be returned to dust, what truth could not survive daylight. In this sense, the gatekeeper was both warden and prisoner. He bore the weight of secrets not meant for one mind, but held anyway. Not because he was holy, but because someone had to. In one of the few remaining testimonies attributed to a defrocked archivist, the gatekeeper is said to have visited the archive of darkness once every decade. Alone. No torch. No guards. He would enter at sunset and return before dawn. What he read, what he remembered, what he erased, no one knew. But the next day, always something changed. A document vanished. A name was reassigned. A chapel was closed. A saint's feast moved without explanation. No decree, no proclamation, only the ripple. The archivist, before his exile, described it this way: "The gatekeeper is not a man. He is an erasure in the shape of a man. Where he stands, clarity flees, and so the theory persists that the gatekeeper is not chosen by Rome, but emerges from necessity. That, when the Church stands at the brink of too much light, he returns. That, when memory grows too honest, he rewrites it. And if he still walks the corridors of the Vatican, he does so as no one, as everyone, as the echo of the office that has always existed. The successor to the Black Pope, not by power but by burden. The man at the threshold, the keeper of what must never cross. Place in the Vatican no map will show, not a corridor, not a chapel, not a chamber with a name, but a space between walls, a silence between footsteps, a presence between sentences in every official document. It is there, not by design but by tradition older than marble, older than scripture, older even than the idea of Rome itself. Those who serve long enough within the Holy See begin to feel it, not as a vision, but as a gravity. The sense that beneath the gilded ceilings, behind the brocade curtains and Latin proclamations, something else moves. Not evil, not divine, something colder, order. It does not speak. It does not write. It does not intervene in the way men expect. It simply adjusts. A breath held before a decision. A pen hesitating over a name. A sudden illness that prevents a vote. A storm that delays a conclave. A document misplaced. A memory altered. A silence so loud it drowns inquiry. This is how the Black Pope works if he ever did. Not through domination, but calibration. Not through thunder, but through a kind of stillness so total it becomes irresistible. And now, centuries after his alleged disappearance, the Church remains. Its popes have changed. Its liturgies revised. Its enemies have risen and fallen. But the questions remain unanswered. How did so many decisions come to pass without record? Why do certain corridors in the Vatican resist renovation? Why do the Jesuits still refer in coded instruction to a figure known only as Umbra? Why, in every century, does a single name never spoken, never printed, reappear only in disappearance? There is no body, no tomb, no face, only influence, imprint, echo. A scholar once wrote, "In every room of power there exists a corner the light cannot reach. And in that corner sits the one who watches the flame not to fan it, but to ensure it does not burn too bright." That corner still exists. Perhaps the man does not. Perhaps the office is dormant. Or perhaps he has changed form again. Perhaps the Black Pope is no longer a person at all. Perhaps he is a system, a methodology, an inheritance of silence passed not by blood nor vow, but by recognition. Perhaps the most dangerous power is not the one that speaks, but the one that waits. And in the stone heart of the Vatican, behind walls that breathe with centuries, perhaps he is still there, watching, waiting, forgetting nothing. So now we ask again, who truly rules, the man upon the throne, or the shadow that makes the throne possible? Who speaks for the Church, and who decides what the Church forgets? The records will not answer. The saints cannot tell. The silence does not break, and the door remains closed for now. Thank you for listening to this journey into the shadows of history. If the silence spoke to you, if the unseen thread stirred your thoughts, then I invite you to leave a comment below and share your theories. Every whisper adds to the echo. And if you wish to walk further down these hidden corridors with us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the most important stories are the ones never told aloud.